And you
All
had
right. Uh-oh.
some.
So we are back. Yes, Champagne Sharks. We are back on our YouTube live streams. We are excited today because I have someone that I communicate with online, but I haven't really had the opportunity to have a face-to-face conversation, face-to-face with this being online, but you get what I mean. With her, I admire her work. I've gotten to, speak with her and listen. I am very happy that there are Black women that are speaking up for our communities in the way that she is. She is the director of, I'll make sure I get this right. She's the director of community engagement and outreach for the organization Missourians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. She herself is formerly incarcerated and can speak to the experiences of being incarcerated and the type of system that is. But even beyond that, really looking at the ways that the law and criminal justice impact our communities. Today we're going to talk about, I'm going to have her on again because she's fucking phenomenal. Today we're going to talk about the death penalty and why that's racist, why that's problematic, and why it has been an issue um, for so long, and why we need to change it. We're going to talk specifically about Kevin Johnson, a young man who fatally shot and killed a police officer, a Kirkwood police officer in Missouri, and when he was 19 years old. And if when you hear his story and you find out more about what happened and the details behind all of it, you realize that the death penalty is not the right sentence. I'm against the death penalty completely, but the way that we've, as a culture, as a society, where we feel like we have the right to take the life of another human being because they've done something we feel like they deserve to take. They took a life, we take their life. I don't support that because there's a lot of reasons, a lot of things that are underneath death, and nobody talks about those things. We're gonna talk about it today. I'm very excited to have and invite to the stream ML Michelle Smith, aka ML. Thank you so much. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. You can hear me okay?
We can hear you okay.
Thank you so much for having me tonight. I appreciate your time.
Well, I want to get right into it. You work for an organization called Missourians for Alternative Alternatives to the Death Penalty.
Mhm.
When you have an organization that says alternatives to the death penalty, you're saying that the death penalty is problematic. There's something that this needs to change. Why is that something that you feel most people need to understand?
Well, when we look at our history, Black people's history here on this land, from the time that our ancestors were brought here, death has been, what they've used to control us: torture, death, abuse. And so we call this system currently a regurgitation of racial justice, racial terror lynchings. So when people, at some point hung from trees, of course, we know there's a strange fruit. Today, they don't hang from trees. They are strapped down on tables and injected with, chemicals, or they're also still putting people in electric chairs. So just a different way to kill someone. And so I think that, we really look and understand what state sanctioned murder today is, and look at it as the history of that reincarnation of lynchings, then that should outrage us all.
So it basically they found all types of new ways to have the same inhumane sentence. They haven't actually addressed any of the issues that would actually one of the main things I would address that they need to be addressing is the reduction of the situations that create violence. So when we and I think that's the problem um with most of these conversations is we don't connect it to the things like poverty. We don't connect it to the circumstances that people are suffering from.
Yeah.
One of my favorite doctors to listen to is Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. I talk about her all the time. She does the work around ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Studies, where
Yeah.
they find that there are psychological and physiological impacts to childhood trauma, and it's passed down from generation to generation to the point where it literally alters your DNA expression. And the reason
Yes.
why I'm saying all this, because people say, "Oh, Vita's always talking about trauma." I am, but we never talk about its impact in reality, because then we'd have to acknowledge that our systems are completely inhumane and they don't actually help us or keep us safe. In fact, they inflict more trauma, which perpetuates more violence.
I definitely agree with you on that. And I think that, our issues have been made to be an individual problem, which is part of the propaganda that, those in charge have, instilled in us, and too many of our people buy it. And so, because it's individual, it's only you. You're the problem. You're poor. You're, drug addicted or whatever. And so, it's never a systemic issue that needs to be addressed. It's only an individual failing. And so that is definitely the problem, especially when we're talking about criminal crime per se. Like you said, poverty. People don't understand if you have stable housing, if you have food, if you have the things that you need, crime goes down. I've had many politicians say to me, "Oh, what do we need to prevent crime? And we need more police." And I'm like, we actually don't need more police. We need more of a society that values the people that are in it. And if you treat people humanely, they will act humanely. Ain't that just
Ain't
something?
that something? But
Yeah.
and to connect it to another larger conversation around how we treat our children, we as Black people, we don't even realize it, but we perpetuate that same thought process. That we need
Yes.
more aggression, we need more rules, we need more enforcement, we need more punishment to get the behaviors to change. We never talk about the ways that we can create conditions so that the child's experiences make them feel valued and they don't need to engage in certain behaviors, because we're so focused on this sort of Eurocentric thinking of crime and punishment. You did something
Yeah.
that we don't like, you did something that was hurtful or harmful, now you must suffer. As opposed to, what can we do to create a new set of experiences? How do we show you that you are valued? Because that's usually what people are missing. And then there's the other aspect of it. There are people who are literally sick. It could
Yeah.
be from trauma. It could be from something, a genetic issue. It could be a few things, but is the answer to kill them as opposed to giving them treatment? Or
Oh,
maybe they don't need to be in certain environments. How do we make sure that they're in healthy environments? What we do is we take them out of an unhealthy environment, have them have these fucked up life experiences to the point where they engage in some harmful behavior,
mhm.
and then we give them more fucked up experiences, and then
Yeah.
expect them to come out knowing, quote unquote, knowing better, even though we psychologically just piled more on top of them.
Just made them institutionalized, which is
Exactly.
almost like having a robot. When it comes to kids, I will say I am a child advocate. And I talk about a lot about how I support my people, and I, work for Black people. My number one group of people that I will ride and die for are Black children, because nobody values them. Black adults don't. I've seen people yell Black Lives Matter and Black Power, but they go home and are treating their kids like massa on a plantation. And I'm
Right.
just thinking, well, that don't the math ain't math, and as we say now. So I think that our children definitely get the brunt of that. And when you look at crime and punishment and our children, there has been no one in prison that I've known, Black people that's incarcerated, that have not been hit as kids. So when we say, oh, guys, spank your kids so police don't do whatever, or
So they don't
gotta,
go to jail.
or whatever, that's not
Hmm.
true. Everybody, and I know a lot of people in prison, Vida, a lot of people all over this country, all of them have been abused as children. So
Yeah.
that is such a lie, and I don't know who keep perpetuating it,
Oh,
but
I
it's
can
not
tell you.
true.
I can tell you exactly what it is. It's
Mhm.
that's part of our intergenerational trauma.
Yeah,
We say, if I don't beat you, the police will. That's what we teach our children. But what we don't realize is that literally comes from, if I don't beat you, massa will, and
yeah,
massa might kill you.
yeah,
So I have to do it to save your life. See, it's literally been a tool for our survival. However, that thing that helped us survive might not help us thrive. And we have to look at that,
yeah.
especially when we realize we're actually creating more subservient children, children who want to be more assimilated, children who feel only think that they can feel safe by bowing their head and being obedient. Because look at what we do to children who rebel against it,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, we want, it's such a contradiction. We want to raise these strong, outspoken, amazing kids that's gonna, fight for people and do the right things. But when they're 8, they can't talk because grown people are here, or you gotta, be quiet and go in the other room, and it's just like these
Don't ask
contradictions.
questions. It's talking back.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes no sense how these people are supposed to go from that as an 8-year-old to a 28-year-old who's going to be doing that's just like even with abusive relationships. People are taught certain things as children, and
Yes.
they grow up that way. So I just think that we just have so much, and it is, of course, from slavery. That reminds me of post-traumatic slave syndrome by Dr. Joy
Facts.
DeGruy.
Facts. That's where I
Yeah,
got it from.
yeah, and
you
it's
know?
very much that, very
Yeah.
much. And we don't realize it though. We think that, oh, I'm doing the right thing, but you're not doing the right thing.
Because there's so many things that go into how a person engages in behavior and why. There's a lot that goes into it. Safety is the number one thing, right? And sometimes I think we believe that someone is safe, so therefore they should be able to behave a certain way. But sometimes if they don't feel safe, it doesn't matter whether or not they're physically safe. So
No,
you're
not at
now
all.
engaging in survival behavior at a moment when you're not being attacked. And I think people don't understand why we need to have that sort of knowledge. And I think that goes directly into this case for Kevin Johnson.
Yeah, it does. It,
His
it
he
does so much.
The way he handled a situation that landed him in jail or in prison was ultimately due to his inability to react rationally in certain situations and to trigger. So let's talk a little bit about Kevin
Yeah.
Johnson, who he is, his background, and why we're advocating clemency for Kevin Johnson.
No problem. So yes, and speaking of children, it definitely goes right into KJ's story. KJ was 19 when he committed a murder, killed a policeman, and ultimately was sentenced to death penalty. But we do have to go back to look at his life. A life of honestly so typical, sadly, of abused child, a neglected child. His mom was his dad was incarcerated. His mother was on drugs, and he and his siblings were, just struggling to about 3 or 4. They were put through like foster care systems and living with different relatives. Kevin was in group homes where he was abused. We've actually spoke with someone who worked at one of those group homes and talked about, the abuse that Kevin suffered there. So he just had a life of abuse on so many levels. Of course, sexual abuse as well. We talk about that a lot. Black boys and black men in sexual abuse. And so, and it's kind of like it's not a thing when it's, a black man or black boy, but it happens. And
Yeah.
Kevin experienced that as well when he was, 9 or 10 or 11 years old. He was being sexually abused by older women. So
Hmm.
he experienced so much trauma, and he did not know how to process things. Right, like you said, when you're traumatized, you don't have the grasp of reality. He actually had some mental health issues that developed at that time. So he was definitely struggling and suffering, and hardly anybody was there to pull him out of that, which was very sad.
Yeah. And I think there's so many, you summarized it, but there were some really excruciatingly difficult parts of his childhood that I read about.
Yeah.
Um and just reading it made me sick to my stomach. You're talking about a child who experienced almost everything um, a child who's experiencing adversity could possibly experience. You know, his mother was severely addicted to crack cocaine, which is a story many people have unfortunately in many Black communities all across the country.
Right.
Um, he spent the first several years of his life in an overcrowded one room shack. His father was incarcerated before he even turned 2 years old. There
Yeah.
was he lived he's according to the information that I was reading, he had to sleep in the bed with both adults and children, multiple people in one bed in this one room shack. He had they had roaches, they had rats. They said that sometimes he was so hungry, him and his brother, they'd have to eat roaches off the floor.
Yes, it's so devastating just to read. And actually, his legal team, they are putting together a video about these issues and this
Mm.
reality. And Kevin spoke about that. And I was looking at the video earlier. It'll probably be released in a few weeks. But I was looking at a video earlier today, and I just, it was I was inconsolable just to
Mm.
understand what he experienced. And the fact, not just what he experienced, no one is there to help. And that's the problem. When kids experience these horrors, the system, the family court, child welfare systems, they all fall through the cracks. But as soon as this young person does something against someone else or against, what I mean, another entity, police, the prosecutors, the courts, the judges, everybody is there to hold them accountable. But when it was time to actually help them, when they were
Mm.
vulnerable, when they needed help, it just wasn't there. And that's so much of our problem in our society anyway. But specifically with KJ, we also call him KJ often. With him, that was very serious. So he, like I say, he experienced all of this trauma. And the one bright spot Kevin had when he was a little boy was his baby brother. He was 7 when his mother had, and they called the little boy Bam Bam. We all have Black folk. We love our nicknames, right?
I had a boy at our church. We called him Bam Bam.
Yeah, so we always love, that's just us. We just love that. And so his mom had his little brother, and he was sickly because he, had some heart conditions due to his mother's drug use. And KJ took to him immediately. I know many people who kind of raised their siblings and just love on them like they're a parent. And that's really how KJ was. He was so protective of his little brother. He would come home after school and made sure he took care of him because they didn't have anybody, right? They, like I said, were shuffled between homes and just suffering a lot. And so when one day happened in 2005 when his little brother did collapse because of his heart condition, and the police arrived, and a few minutes later the paramedics arrived. KJ and several other family members just felt like the police were not, showing as much urgency as they would had it been a white kid in a rich suburb somewhere, right? And
This is in Missouri. Let's remember where we're
and
at. We're talking about a slave state, right? You're talking.
yes, this is the someone said this recently. This is the most northern southern state there is.
It is.
Yeah,
That's probably the best description of it. Because to be
yeah,
honest with you, my mother is from St. Louis, Missouri, and I would go there every year. Most of my family's from there. Um, but I remember one of the things that used to trip me out, it was how southern it felt. Because
mm,
the accents, the food, the culture, the music, it all sounded so southern to me. So I
yeah,
definitely would say that's also a big part of the culture there. So when you think of that, you have to, I can't not think about the other parts of Southern culture, the blatant disregard for Black life. Not to
yeah,
say California don't got a problem. We have one of the biggest incarceration states in the country. So definitely not saying California's off the hook. But I do think our racism operates a little bit differently, right?
yeah,
Missouri is notorious. I mean, in St. Louis, they were literally spraying chemicals all up and down the street, DDT, all up and down blacks, literally. You can go, there's a whole
yeah,
documentary on it now. Um, they had I mean, it was just so many egregious
It
things
was
that have taken place in
environmental,
Missouri.
the water and sewage, all of the environmental issues that affect Black communities. So you're
Yeah.
very, very right. It's very, and honestly, it's so segregated here. Like there are literally
Oh
communities
yeah.
and neighborhoods where not just Black and white, certain folks live, Irish or Italian or Asian. Everybody has their little chunk of the city. So it's very, very much
Yeah.
segregated. And yeah, so it is a very southern state. So because of that, KJ, they felt like the police were just being kind of, what the issue was, they were looking for him. He had probably like a probation violation for some small charge he had. He had not been in prison, but he had done, things that young people do in the community.
And
And so
only black boys get
exactly
criminal
get
records
charged.
for. Right.
Exactly. There you go, right there. So he felt like they were looking for him. They were searching the house, they were walking around, but they weren't necessarily paying his little brother the attention. And they were also not letting the mother come in, which I get if they're working on a little boy, not letting her come in. But they were just being just extra violent and extra just horrible about it, right? You can tell somebody who cares about you, and you can tell people who just like don't, right?
Right.
So and so anyway, a few minutes later, a little while later, they got him to the hospital, but he died. His 12-year-old brother died, and that literally made KJ snap. He had been through so much in his life, and he couldn't process what was going on. He could not process the fact that he let his little brother down because he was his protector and his,
Mm.
basically his parent almost. So he just had a, whatever the medical people, I'm sure the psychologists call it something, but I'll just say he snapped and he just really lost it. And later that evening, he killed one of the cops. And so that is how KJ ended up on death row from a lifetime of trauma from the community that was poor and, they didn't care about the community either to the day that that happened to his little brother. So it's such a tragic story.
It
And
is.
honestly, to talk to KJ, he's such a smart and amazing person. I just wonder, like how he even survived, even as well as he did that situation. But it was very difficult. But that's why we're fighting for KJ. We're fighting for him because we don't believe that your worst mistake defines you, right? I mean, a lot of people have done a whole lot of things, right? But if you want to better yourself and become a better person, you have that opportunity, and we want that opportunity for Kevin, and he has. There are even prisons are communities. People don't want to understand that they're communities. They are a microcosm of what's going on out here. So he has a community of people who care for him. That respects him. He's a mentor to the young men coming in, and so many people very much look up to him and respect him. And he's definitely not the same person he was when he was 19 years old.
And now let's talk about that. So how old is he now?
He is 37.
He's 37. So he's spent about what's that? Almost 20 years. I'm not good at math. Is it almost 20 years?
Yeah, it's,
Yeah.
well, it'll be 18.
18 years. So he's been incarcerated for 18 years. From what I read, he sounds like he got some psychiatric help and some psychological help. And that was the other thing that I found to be interesting, that he had an evaluation before he got his sentence, right? And the psychiatrist said something really, let me see if I can pull that up because I don't want to mess up what the psychiatrist said. But the psychiatrist basically was like, this is the most egregious situation I've ever seen.
Mhm.
What did he say? Among the most extreme cases that this psychiatrist has ever seen in his 40 years of practice and 30 plus years of performing psychiatric evaluations in connection with capital litigation, that he said that the extensive, let me see,
Frontal lobe, I believe.
let me see. So he described Kevin's childhood as among the most extreme cases. In all of his 40 years of practice and 30 plus years performing psychiatric evaluations in connection with capital litigation, this is the most egregious. This is among the most extreme, which says a lot because I'm sure that psychiatrist understands brain development, impulse control, and all the things that I talk about on this podcast a lot. People think I just be talking, and they don't understand the
No, no.
connection that
It's
that childhood trauma has to our abilities to make healthy, rational decisions in moments when we're triggered, right?
yeah,
Um,
very much,
and
yes.
now you have this very, very young man, a teenager. If we can call, what's that grown ass swimmer's name that they kept calling him a teenager, Ryan Lochte and all of them,
And he was 30.
right? Here's this guy who's 19, literally still a teenager.
Yeah.
By the way, people always talk about how young people's brains aren't fully developed until about 30, especially for young men. Well, if you've experienced a certain level of trauma, it's even more than that, because your
Yeah.
brain's ability to develop, because you spend so much of your time in survival mode. And I've talked about this so much about the brain and development, because your brain doesn't even, when you're born, you're only really operating mostly out of your reptilian part of your brain, which is your brain stem, or that's where your survival responses are. Fight, flight, and freeze, eat, sleep, shit,
Right.
all that is in your survival, right?
Yeah.
um and as you get older, the other parts of your brain begin to come online more, such as your limbic system, which is your ability to empathize, your ability to connect with other people, and express and understand feelings a certain way. And you operate out of that part of your brain at around the age 2 until about age 10. And your ability for impulse control is very small. That's why we move things out of the way for a 2-year-old instead of expecting them to
Yeah.
not touch something shiny and glittery, right?
Mhm.
Because we know they don't have the impulse control. The first thing they're going to do is grab it. They don't even begin to develop that till around 10, 11 years old, which is why sometimes we don't realize how we're overreacting to situations with children when they don't have the development. Well, what
Yeah,
happens is the next thing that's supposed to come online around 10, 11 years old is your neocortex. That's where your impulse control is. That's where your planning comes. When you turn 15, that's where your long-term planning comes in. That's where your ability to think long term, to be able to identify, understand, and think of the possibilities of the future,
mhm.
in a realistic way,
Yeah.
is around 15 years old. Um, when you've been through a lot of trauma,
Yeah.
that development is impeded.
You
Certain
start
parts of
to.
your brain don't become fully developed, especially if you're not getting the proper love and connection and healthy relationship in your childhood. It
So
literally impedes your ability for your brain to fully develop. So I think it's really important that we understand that when we look at these cases. And his case isn't the only case like this. You'll probably find this across the board on many, if you look at a lot of cases around violence, you'll probably
yeah,
find a lot of this type of history.
very much
Is
so.
it's so to be triggered by the officers that just let your brother die, the one light spot that you had, that it's not mind blowing. It makes sense.
It's
And if
really
he
not.
spent all this 18 years rehabilitating really himself, because I know the system itself isn't known for rehabilitating people,
Yeah,
right?
it is. It is a decision that you make and that you have to, go about actually making sure you do, because that the system does not rehabilitate you. It makes you worse, and it's very much a situation where you have to make a decision. You literally
Yes.
have to make a decision. Am I going to live, in that same trauma, even where I am, or if I'm going to, try to be better? And interestingly enough, KJ had a reason to be better. He had a baby. He had a daughter
Oh,
when I
wow.
was happened. Yeah, she was two. She was a toddler herself. Her name is Corey. She's a sweet young lady today, and she actually just became a mother. So she's 19 and she's a mom, and she's the same age her dad was when he
When he
went
went in.
went to
Hmm.
prison. But it's so much, we put so much onto our young people, all of our adult aspirations and needs and desires, and we don't actually let them be children and understand that they're not developed. And there actually was a death penalty case called, the person's name was Roper, and they decided, the Supreme Court decided that if you're under 18, we won't give you death penalty because of that brain development. But now we know it's up to at least to, like I said, 21, 24, 25. where people are not, developed correctly or totally in their brain development.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely past 18, and that's something that we need to look at as well. That's something that not only we need to look at, but our um, oh, elected officials. I'll have you
Mm-hmm.
trouble saying that word because they're such trash a lot of times. But our elected officials, those people who make these laws and rules, they really need to look at children. In my own state, years ago, we had a governor, and our governor, he was tough on crime and all that. And one time, his 30-year-old son got caught with some marijuana. And he said about him, "Oh, he's just a good boy that made a mistake." Now, I didn't know he was 30. I thought he was a boy. I was like, okay, he must be 16. But when I looked it up, he wasn't. He was a fully adult man. So some people can get that compassion and that
Mm-hmm.
understanding, of childhood, but it's not reserved for our people. It's not reserved for black children,
Exactly.
especially black boys. It is not.
Especially black boys. In fact, not only especially black boys, but if the idea is pushed that they're just naturally brutish and they're just naturally violent, they're naturally aggressive, this is just who they are, and that we must exterminate them. That's essentially the message that we've been getting, and a lot of our institutions have been pushing, right?
Yeah.
So it's definitely something that more people need to be understanding of and to look at. What are we doing that's creating these situations? I talked about this, what I opened up with.
Yeah.
What are we doing to create these situations, and what are we doing to stop it? Death and I'm against the incarceration system as it stands. um I do believe we should have a system of rehabilitation that is not something that we're just like, let's inflict more pain and punishment
Yeah. We
onto
shouldn't do
someone
any
who's
of that.
already suffering. We
Yeah.
have to teach, and that doesn't, and if someone just really isn't physically safe to be in society, there has to be a way of giving them a space where they can be safe to themselves and others. And if I was just reading this book, I'm reading this book. I'm actually pretty much done with it because I'm interviewing the author of it. But this book called California Soul, and it's about this chef, a star chef here in LA. He's a black man. He's from Watts. He represents, or he was once, well, not once. He grew up in the Grape Street gang in Jordan Downs projects.
Okay.
Um, and he's now a star chef. And they tried to push him as a sort of redemption story, like, oh, he went to jail and he came out. Now he's a star chef. He got his life turned around. And when you read his book, he basically points out that's not how it really works. There's so much trauma that you experience that even when you're given opportunities, you almost throw them away. And he tells a story about how he got upset he was messing up at work. He got addicted to drugs. He was messing up at work. Um, and they were about to let him go.
Mhm.
He got upset and basically shut this whole restaurant down. Walked in, told everybody to leave, and because it was in his neighborhood, nobody was going to challenge him too much on that.
Okay.
And it was but he wasn't able to think rationally, even in that situation. And what ended up happening was he ended up, the next day, because the community saw this restaurant was no longer saved by him, it got robbed the next night.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's interesting about that story to me is the fact that he was like, I was still messing up because I still had all this trauma. I still didn't understand how to make healthy decisions. And it wasn't until he got more help and did more work, and talking to the right people, where he was able to get out of that and start to be healthy again. But nobody tells you, oh yeah, you need to go get, some psychological support. You need some mental health support.
I mean,
Um,
even worse, they tell you don't. Like,
yeah.
and I don't care about people saying go get counseling. They don't mean that when they say that on social media. It's like, oh, black men need to go get help. They don't mean that. They're just trying to throw shade. But actually getting help, so many people just don't feel like they, can. They feel like they'll be judged, and they feel like they're going to have it used against them, which we've seen, right? We've seen those particular situations. So it's very
Mm-hmm.
difficult to convince someone. And even when you're incarcerated, it's like um, the doctors and the psychiatrists, they work for the prison. So they ain't your friend. You don't have a confidential relationship with them. right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a middleman, right? So if you go talk to the doctor about being suicidal or such, or whatever, they have to go tell the administration of the prison, and then you're gonna find yourself in administrative segregation.
Mm-hmm.
They call it PC, because you made a threat to yourself. And so just that not trusting, counseling and therapists and doctors is something that's very deep in our people, and especially poor people, black people, and black men, to where they
Yes.
don't trust. And I can't blame, I've seen it, happen.
Listen,
So I can't blame.
we just seen a whole thing explode online with a black woman therapist saying nonsense
Oh God.
to black
Yeah,
men, right?
yeah,
So I get it. I get it. And the thing is, there are alternatives to talk therapy too, right? We don't ever talk about the mental health support that can come from other spaces, such as art therapy, or exercise, or just having close protective relationships. In fact, a healthy, close protective relationship is the number one way to heal from trauma, is having healthy protective
yeah,
relationships. What we don't realize is that feeling of connection. Remember I told you, when you're experiencing brain development, I'm going to go through the brain discussion again, because I really want people to
yeah,
understand why childhood is so important. And when we're talking about what we're talking about now around incarceration and the death penalty, but the same way your brain develops, in that order of reptilian brain, survival part of your brain, which is eat, sleep, shit, mate, all those things are in the survival part of the brain. That comes on, you're born with that online. The part of your brain that develops empathy and connection, that comes online around 2 to 10 years old. That's where a lot of strong emotions are. That's why when you tell a 2-year-old no, you can't have that candy bar, and they throw themselves on the floor, kicking and screaming and crying. That's because that's where they operate in their brain. That no felt so deep to them, right?
right.
And they don't have the impulse control to stop it. That's why we have to calm them. People just walk away, or they hit their kid, which makes it worse. What actually helps them is sitting with them and helping them stay calm. And but anyway,
Yeah.
then your neocortex comes online around the age 10, 11 years old. That's where you have more impulse control. But even then, it's developing, it's still growing.
Mhm.
Your planning, your creativity, your strategic, all your strategy, all that stuff is in your neocortex. When you're afraid, when you're angry, which is really just being hurt or afraid,
Mhm.
guess what happens? Your ability to plan and think and have impulse control goes offline.
Yeah.
You know what else goes offline? Your ability to be empathetic, your ability to connect, that goes offline. And as I tell the kids when I do this example, I say you flip your lid, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
And then you end up in your survival part of your brain, which is your fight, flight, freeze. And for women, there's a fourth one called appease. And that's where our bodies flow with oxytocin. We become more bonded with our abusers, right?
Yeah.
um, what people don't realize is that when this goes offline and this goes offline, you're left to survive.
That's it. Yeah.
And it literally goes into your body. We don't think about emotions as being a physical experience. We only think about them as being a psychological experience, or some sort of thing out in the ethos somewhere that's not really reality, because we tell ourselves logic and emotions have no place together. But it's all in your brain. It's all
Yeah.
physiological. In fact, when you get afraid, there are things that happen in your body. What happens? Heart starts
Yeah.
beating faster.
Or your stomach,
You lose
you
your
know.
appetite, right? You get anxiety in your stomach. Your blood rushes faster. Your pupils dilate to see danger. Your brain goes, "You're in danger. I see danger. I got to get ready to fight or flee this situation." So your body shoots off cortisol and adrenaline. That's why when you're running from a dog, you running faster than you've ever ran in your life, to the point where you don't even feel your fucking legs, right?
Yeah.
Um, Glucose is being pumped into your muscles. So now you're stronger than ever. You hear these stories about mothers saving their children, lifting up cars
Yeah.
and shit. It's not
Yeah.
magic.
Yeah.
It's literally all the strength her body could possibly muster pushed into her muscles, right? The thing is, when these chemicals, such as especially cortisol, go shooting through your body, it's also not healthy for you. It actually causes physical damage to your body. It also creates a problem where as you develop, especially if you're young, and this system is being activated over and over and over again, that cortisol begins to flood your system, and you become hyper reactive to situations. It becomes a problem in your body where you are more likely to get heart disease, diabetes, certain types of cancers. And this is factual. You can look it up. If you don't
Yes.
believe me, look up the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. You can later, after this podcast, I want you to look up the TED Talk with Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, and she explains how this works. And she can go into further detail of this. But this is important to understand because it literally impacts
It
our
is.
ability to plan and think. When
Yeah.
you're angry and upset, you're not thinking long term. When you get mad, you talk to somebody who's angry. Be as rational as you want to be. Give all the facts and figures you want. They don't hear a goddamn thing you said because they are angry and
Yeah.
they are hurt.
They can't
They
remember.
are
And don't they say people who are angry, they tell the truth because they ain't worried about, they don't have that something to tell them,
to
to be
stop.
nice and to your empathy.
Well, I'll say this. I actually don't believe people tell the truth when they're angry because I think people, when they're angry, they're more likely to say whatever needs to be said to hurt the other person. I don't think
Oh,
it has to be factual. I just think it has to be something they know. I know you're sensitive about this thing, so I'm going to
so,
tell you, yeah, you are stupid because I know you're sensitive about that. I don't actually think you're stupid, but I know it'll hurt you.
yeah.
Because I always think like, have I said things out of anger that I really didn't mean? I definitely have. How many kids have said, "I hate you, mom"? We know
Right. Yeah,
damn
we
well
know
them kids don't hate their parents. In fact, something happened to their mama, they wouldn't know what to do, right? In fact, most children, even if their parents are horrible, most children still very much love their parents.
they do. Yes. They definitely
So
do.
yes, I'm not a strong believer that people say the truth when they're angry. In fact, I think it's the exact opposite. Because I always say to myself, what if someone judged me by the worst thing I ever did? What if everywhere I went, everyone judged me by the worst thing I ever did? They said, "Oh, see, that's her. That's the real Vida. I know Vida. That's the real Vida. The Vida that was that in that moment." And if you think about ourselves, when we were that person, or we did something we look back on, we probably wish we hadn't done or wish we had done differently. You'll go back and you can look at the mistakes and then say, well, what was I feeling? What was I needing in that moment?
Right. Yeah.
And you start to realize, oh, I had needs. It doesn't excuse what you did. It doesn't mean that you can't be held accountable. You should, but you have to hold yourself accountable. But at some point, you have to learn how to say, okay, look, I know how I got here. This is what I can do to change it moving forward. Otherwise, you'll keep doing the same thing over and over again. No matter how much you regret it, you're like, damn, I'm doing this again. Because we never addressed the
Yeah.
need and the needs that resulted in feelings that resulted in these behaviors.
That's very true. Until you get those needs met, you're definitely not going to. But I was thinking when I said people tell the truth, they're angry. I'm thinking more like in relationships. Normally if you've been nice to your spouse, but as soon as they make you mad, you tell them
That's when you sick
all
of
their
the motherfucker.
flaws.
That's because you sick of the motherfucker. That's when you sick. You sick of this person. You like, look, I'm ready to end this now. I'm gonna
Right.
just say you just like your daddy. Oh my god, all that type of shit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I definitely feel like this is important for us to understand that our people who've experienced such heavy trauma, instead of actually, you know what? Actually, before I even get to that point, you made an excellent point that I want to touch on, which was about the fact that we failed people all their
Yeah.
lives.
Yeah.
KJ's story is like that. He was
All the
getting beaten every day from the age of 4 years old till he started kindergarten, which is at least a year or two. He gets into school, teacher tries to report, hey, I think this kid's being abused. Nobody intervened. Nobody
Yeah.
intervened for that baby, for that child.
No. And actually, one of his teachers, actually, a couple of them have said, I wish I would have done something. That's normally what people, I wish I would have. But I mean, our education system is just as bad as anything else. So these people don't have the resources or, the capacity to take on, a whole other responsibility. But, they definitely have said, I wish I would have done something. I've seen that so many times where young people are suffer so greatly. I remember a story of another young man who also was on death row who was executed. His name was Corey Johnson, and he had dyslexia. And we talk about mental health issues and those sorts of things. So he had dyslexia, but his mother, didn't understand or didn't care. So when he didn't do his homework right, he get beat. Instead of getting helped, instead of recognizing that he had a learning disorder, he was bad. Whenever our children, our people can't do something right or do it wrong or whatever, you're bad. You're not, you know, just, like I said, some kind of mental issue or learning disability, you're bad. And
Mm-hmm.
so Corey, and Corey was also, he was one of the 13 that the federal government executed 2 years ago. And he was severely traumatized and beaten. So yeah, so society does not help, from education to social services to the police. Police
Mm-hmm.
are called to those scenes as well when a child is neglected or abused and nothing happens. But later on, when they actually commit a crime, like I said, the prosecutors, the police, the judges, every arm of the law comes on that person, and nobody cared before. So that's very much was Corey's problem, but also Kevin's and so many other people. So many.
Yeah, and I think you're raising definitely good points on that. As far as it's not even just the families failing, it's
Yeah.
institutions failing that we're even putting our children in. Our children are struggling with um you know learning disabilities, physical disabilities that people aren't recognizing as physical disabilities, autism, so developmental challenges, right? Neurodiversity, and then our children get punished for it. Our children are made to suffer for it. Our children are told, you're bad, you don't know how to behave and sit down.
Mhm.
Or they get told that your child is just slow and has special needs.
Right. Yeah.
And then you put them in a class where they don't even get help there either, because they're with other children. It's a whole messed up system. But the fact that we always resort to punishment to change behavior instead of changing the circumstances or the situations that's driving the behavior, right? So, an example: child suffering from a learning disability, teachers not supporting them. What kind of interest do they continue to have in education? Why would I continue to be here? If I, why, I'll check out. How many of our kids just check out? We call them lazy. They're not lazy. They're dissociating. That's the only place that they feel safe. Because when they come out, guess what? You're in their face, talking crazy to
Yeah, it's very much. I remember when my son was in high school, he was a good student, but he didn't like science.
them.
And he just told me one day he ain't gonna try because he don't like it, and I let him be. I think he got a D. I don't care. He graduated eventually. When he was supposed to, but I didn't. I wasn't like, what, you have to do this. That's not something he liked. He was a computer kid. He still is. He programmed.
So he likes
He
science. He just
actually,
didn't like their science and the way
yeah,
they
he right.
taught it is what it sounds
He
like.
likes his science. Like, even this computer I'm talking to you on, he built my system. But he just didn't like it, and he wasn't going to do it. And he told me that, and I'm like, okay, well, the things that you like, let's excel in those. So we do have to give our children that leeway and let them, develop, and then help them when they don't. Kids who are have learning disabilities, or, and actually, interesting enough, KJ had a brain injury.
Mm,
He had fallen several times as a kid and had to have stitches and had concussions. And so he had injuries from that as well. And it's like, how can you punish someone that you never helped, and you saw that they had problems and you never sought to help them, but all of a sudden you have to punish them as if they, did everything premeditated and didn't have any problems. It's such a
right.
working people center kids to want to work. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
funny. Yeah,
No, this is a
yeah,
fact.
it really.
Before we go, I want to make sure we talk about the justice for I'm sorry, clemency for KJ toolkit.
Yes,
This
yes.
event you have coming up to even explain to folks how they can share this information, how they can talk about this information around his case. And I also want to talk a little bit about your organization. So this is a campaign that your organization has taken on, Missourians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. Um, let's talk a little bit about that. So, how did your organization even get started on this case?
Well, this is our work. This is what we do. We do death penalty abolition, and death penalty abolition has a few different aspects in it. One is called abolition by attrition. And attrition means you tackle each little piece of the death penalty system: prosecutors, trials, the people on death row, support them. And so our legislature as well, we deal a lot with our elected officials. So we try to chip away at every aspect that goes into someone being executed in our state. And so this is like our mission, our main priority that we deal with. We also support people that just prison conditions overall because it's all horrible, but we focus on people that are on death row and trying to deal with the state that we have death penalty in Missouri. And it's a very sad. I talk to people from Chicago a lot, and they're like, "Oh, we don't have that here." I'm like, "Yeah, I know, but we're not at that place yet. So we're getting there though." But yeah, so that's what and we call it MADP. So that's what MADP does. We fight to abolish the death penalty, and we support people who are on death row. Probably in February of this year, we started working specifically on Kevin's case because he was once you get to the end of your appellate process, you're closer to getting an actual execution date. So we started working on Kevin's case a little bit more, connecting with his family and legal team. And I've gotten very close with his family, very supportive of his daughter and his siblings as well, because I need to, in order for me to fight for him and to, amplify his humanity, I need to know where he came from. And it's not that prison cell, right? It's not, death row. He came from a community of people who, it wasn't perfect. They were poor, but today he has a great community around him that loves him very much. So we have the Clemency for KJ campaign going right now. And the main thing that I'm really asking people to do is to go, look, read like you did. I really appreciate you doing that. And to really learn about KJ and what death penalty means to our people and just speak about it, share, speak, write, follow our page is MADPMO. And this is something that is so tragic because it's the final, right? It's final. Our country also executes innocent people. We're going to put that out there as well. KJ is not, but we have in our country and in our state executed innocent people. So thank you for putting that up. So yeah, so we are, like I said, just trying to get the word out about KJ's case and the fact that he is human, he is a person, his life matters. And what he did does not define him. And he needs to be here for his family, for his daughter, for his grandson. He had a grandson September the 9th. And so for his whole family, his grandson, he needs to be here. So that's what our work entails. And of course, the legal team, they're in court, doing what they do. But we're out here trying to, just amplify the community and educate the community.
I love that. And I love that you guys are taking this on. I love that you guys are doing the work that you're doing
Thank
because
you.
this is an important conversation that needs to happen, but it's also an important action that needs to take place. So,
Yes.
how can people support this campaign? How can people learn more about this campaign and why and understand the importance of it? Where can they get that information?
So next Wednesday, so a week from today, we are hosting a Zoom meeting, and it's a Bitly link. Take action for KJ. So if you go to Bitly, take action for KJ, or go to our website or our social media, you can register. And if you come to that Zoom meeting that we're having, you're going to learn all about the toolkit. We're going to delve into it. We have some videos as well that we're going to show and really educate people on Kevin, on his case, and how to support him. We're also at some point going, if people locally at least, going to be doing some rallies and things of that nature out in the community. We're going to bother our governor. We're going to ask people to call the governor's office and bother him because why not, right? So it's always something to do. So yeah, Bitly/Clemency. I'm sorry, Bitly/Take Action for KJ is our toolkit launch. And people can share. We have about 5 or 6 different posts that you can share on social media. We'll add more. But people, we be on socials. We are on IG and Facebook. A lot of us don't like it, but we are, right? We get
Right.
addicted sometimes. So just share. Share it with your family, your friends. Read. Just get involved. We know that everybody can't do this as their job, but whatever little help that you can provide, we really, really appreciate it. So MADPMO is on social media. And that letter is actually for organizations. So we work with a lot of organizations, thankfully. We have a lot of partnerships right now and we're growing. And so if anybody out there has an organization that they represent that would like to sign on to the org letter, and that means your organization pledges to share and amplify KJ's case, as well as if we do some actions, if you can come, we would love people to come to town. I also didn't mention this. I'm in St. Louis, which is Ferguson, ground zero. That's where I'm born and raised. So we like to protest. We like to lift our voices. So we're definitely going to be asking people to do that for Kevin. And so this is one way to do that through your organization.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for, like I said, for the work that you guys are doing. Thank you so much for including us, but also including other organizations to join in and support this effort and support this work. As somebody who yourself has experienced the criminal justice system and what happens during incarceration, the ways in which we suffer in these systems, I'm very happy to see this is the work that you're doing, because a lot of times people who are doing a lot of advocacy work have never had the experience. Like if you look at a lot of homeless activists, right, advocates, a lot of them aren't homeless, right?
I've never been.
And have never been. That doesn't take away them doing the work that they do. That's great. But I think it's dope when people who've actually had experience are part of that work, because this is your movement that you should be in control of. In fact, a lot of times you get these activists and advocates that go to college and learn about it and then come back and say, okay, we're going to organize formerly incarcerated people. We're going to organize homeless people. We're going to organize all these groups, but only want them when it's time to put them in front of a mic. Only want them when it's time to be just to train them in what to say and be in front of the media. But they're not the ones that are actually running the organization. Not the ones I'm really happy to see that, you're doing this work, but also that you're part of an organization that is hiring, because you're a director there, as somebody who is hired to do this is actually from the community that she's representing, is actually from that system and understands that system. How did you come to do this work?
That is such a long story. My
Well, we can do the big headlines. We can do the big headlines.
So I'll say my advocacy started 20 years ago when I actually worked for Division of Child Support Enforcement. Now, this is a horrible place to work. Okay, child support is, I don't know what I was thinking, but anyway, that's where I landed. And so I started, really paying attention to the family court system. And I'm just looking around and thinking, you know what, this is kind of, just very biased. I just saw a lot wrong in the system. And so what I did was, while I was working during the day, as a child support worker, I would volunteer at an organization called the Father Support Center. And I became an advocate who would help men go to family court and get their children. So either custody or visitation or whatever they needed. And because I just felt like the family court system was very biased towards poor men, i.e. Black men, right? And so that was a huge thing. So I started doing that. And it's the thing is, they just don't know how to navigate the system. Even if you've been to like traffic court, right? Or you know what I mean, you got a ticket and you got to go to court. Family court is totally different. And so I just, empowered men to fight for their children, went to court with them, explained the words because they talk over people's heads, right? And so that was my first foray into advocacy. I also did some animal advocacy because I have fur babies, so I love them. So yeah, so I'm just advocating in the spaces basically where I worked or where I live. And then some years later, when I was incarcerated, I called a friend who I knew was in prison. I called my friend and I was like, "You didn't tell me this what prison was like." And he was like, "No, like you shouldn't be in there." But that's a whole nother story. And
he
so
was like, "Why would I tell you? You're not going to end up in prison."
Yeah. So I began advocating in there. I've always been that person who there could be 20 people around looking at an injustice and mumbling about it, and I'm gonna be the one being loud. Like that's just me. I'm gonna be loud about it. I'm not going to mumble or stay quiet. I'm going to see it. I'm going to say something. So I went to prison. I became a law clerk and I helped women with their legal issues. And so that's kind of how my criminal justice system or criminal legal system advocacy work started. That was back in 2012, 2013. And just, did it ever since. As honestly, at first, just like voluntary, it wasn't paid. But I got this job at this organization about 2 years ago, and it's definitely a passion. I remember the Troy Davis case, and actually today is the day that they executed Troy Davis. May he rest in power. But I remember that case, and I remember those things. So when this opportunity came up, I knew that it was for me, and it's very draining. It's emotional.
It's very emotional. I know
It
that.
very much is. People think that I'm serious all the time, but I laugh and stuff because I deal with some heavy topics every day. But I think that this is the place for me, and I'm able to deal with that trauma, and helping other people and really fighting for this. So that's kind of how I got in this. And I also have my own org where we advocate for prison reform, like the statutes around prisons. There have been at least 90 people that have died this year in Missouri Department of Corrections, and so we're outraged by that. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
working with some people to try to figure out how we can, like you said, there is going to be a prison at this moment. I want them all to go away, but right at this moment, there is a place, a prison, and I want it to be a place where humanity is valued. And right now, that's just
Absolutely.
not. That's the bare minimum. We're gonna have to value humanity, right? That's just the floor, and we're not even at the floor right now. We're in the
E-
basement. So
Exactly.
trying to get to that floor. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to thank you so much again for the work that you've done, and I want to thank you for um, joining us here and giving us the opportunity to have this conversation. Again, we want people to support. We want you to sign the petition. Shout out to RP. And
Yes.
thank
Thank
you
you.
for joining us in the chat. RP signed it. Ado's Truth is thanking us for sharing this information. Thank you, Ado's Truth. Rob B said this is a good use of the stream. Shout out to you, Rob B. Thanks for letting us know. Make sure you guys like this. In order for us
Yeah.
to continue to do this, we need your likes. We need you to subscribe. Share this. This is going to be available after we close out in a few minutes. So please share this link, share this stream, let your friends know, because this is an important issue. We want you guys to go ahead and make sure that you are doing your part to also take action. Not everybody can, march. Not everybody can send
Yeah.
money. Not everybody can do that, and we understand that. But sharing the information, sharing the knowledge, because we dropped some gems in this conversation. So, sharing this information is part of doing your part. It's not the only part, but it's part of the work.
Yes. It's the
Um,
start. Yeah.
Shout out to Adrian in the chat. Shout out to Ado's Truth. Shout out to Kenny, Lazarus Lives. I can't wait to bring the Sharks back on, so all of us are on here again. We haven't been on in a while. We had a lot going on. A lot of us, life happens,
Yes.
but
Yes.
we're back. We're bringing the streams back. Shout out to everyone who joined us today and for supporting Champagne Sharks. But we really want to urge you to support the work that Missourians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty are doing. This particular campaign is the big one. We want you to get that toolkit. I'm trying to pull up the right thing this time. I'm still getting used to using our live stream, so forgive me if I'm sharing the wrong stuff. I'm still
No.
getting used to this. But we want you to support. We want you to sign the form, register for the Zoom meeting, for the toolkit. This
Yeah.
is something that we definitely want you to support. There's the
Yeah.
information. I have it up now.
And that's a picture of that's Kevin, that's KJ.
That's
Uh,
KJ,
it is. Yeah.
who has been doing the work to, rehabilitate himself.
And Vida, real quick, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but real quick, his daughter said something recently. He's been a better father to her than most of her friends' dads who are out here. He
Mm,
has been, when I tell you present, he made an arrangement with her school to get all of her report cards and all of her grades. And like when she would mess up or didn't do some homework or something, he knew about it immediately, like if he was at home, right? So he made that effort to be a present and supportive father for his daughter. And a lot of people in his position and other positions would not have done that. So he has a great, and we're actually going to be, putting out some stuff with his daughter featured. But they have such a beautiful relationship, and I really, really do value that, and appreciate that so much of him, because he made sure that his daughter understood that he was going to do all he could to be still there. And sadly, he's not there physically because of those situations that happen, but he does his best to be there for her today, in her entire life. So I just wanted to put that out there. He is actually an amazing father, like many other Black men are. So just wanted to note that as well.
Absolutely. And that is, I'm glad you made sure to highlight that. Um, because that is another image they try to portray, is that, Black men aren't good fathers. Now we know all the studies are showing that Black men are some of the most involved parents among all other men, right? In fact, we're like number one in most as far as Black
Yes.
men, most involvement. But that
Mhm.
doesn't get talked about much, it doesn't get talked about really at all.
Mhm.
Um, I want to make sure I put the link in the chat. So it's bit.ly/ take action for KJ.
Mhm.
Putting that in the chat for you guys, so
And
you guys
please,
can
yes,
go ahead
please
and
share
register.
that, register, share it, and we're just going to have a evening of really learning about the case, about KJ, and how people can help, and support. But it's going to be about. And look, I tell people all the time, I'm old. I'm not on TikTok. I know what it is, and if there's some viral going, I'll go look. But I don't sit on TikTok all day. So we definitely, want the young folks to, get on TikTok and talk about him as well. So we'll work on all that.
Okay. I
Yeah.
love that. Thank you again for joining us. Make sure you guys go ahead and share the link I just put in the chat room. Register, sign up. Also, you can get more information because there's details when you for actually this is for the for organizations, but if you're just interested, I really recommend you go to the organization letter and go to
Mhm.
tinyurl.com/clemency number 4 KJ. That's where you can actually read a lot of details of his story. That's where I got a lot of the information from. It was very helpful. If you have an organization, um, please sign up, support, find ways to make sure that you're a part of the work that's going forward. A lot of people have organizations, and some of these organizations are doing some great things, and some aren't doing as much. And I
Mhm.
know you probably want to. This is an opportunity to do that.
And you
Sometimes we
don't
don't.
have to be.
Mhm.
I should go real quick. You don't have to be a criminal legal justice organization.
Any
Any.
organization.
Yes. As long as you value humanity, we appreciate it.
I love it. You got that 501(c)(3) you've been sitting on. Go ahead, join up. Um,
Okay.
some people have
Yeah.
nonprofits. They're not doing much yet or haven't done anything at all. Go ahead and sign
Mhm.
up. It can and get and if you have members, if you have people that are doing work with you, let them know. Let them know that this is something that they can sign up for and support. So thank you again. Shout out to your organization. You can visit their website at MADP. Is it MADP.org?
MADPMO.
MADPMO from, I'm guessing, from
Yeah.
Missouri,
Sure. Yeah.
.org. So MADPMO.org,
Yeah.
and support the work that they're doing, and read more, learn more, understand more. You can never have enough information. And also, like I said before, after we're about to close out, so this is your opportunity to go ahead and look for that TED Talk about the adverse childhood experiences study with Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. Just look up ACEs, uh just TED Talk ACEs. I promise it's the only one that's going to come up. So check that out. It'll give you more insight and understanding into how childhood trauma impacts our physical and psychological health as we get older. And I think that'll lend a lot of information to his story. So when you read his story, you'll understand why we're advocating for clemency for KJ. Thank you again, Michelle slash ML. Thank you
Thank
again. I hope to see you on this stream again. We'll talk more about your story because your story is also interesting, but why it's important that we have these conversations. We want to
Yes.
discuss that more. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Bye bye.
Everyone, please make sure that you um like, subscribe, you share. We want to continue to do more of these streams. Um we are, yeah, we're gonna do more. We're gonna do more. Don't even worry about it. Shout out to you all. Thank you and good night.